there's a lack of competence, and I think we're seeing the consequences of that. So, they have very high expectations. You hear Witkoff and Trump himself saying, yeah, there's going to be a deal right around the corner, and that's just not realistic. There's 3 years of non-negotiation and years of hostility proceeding at there. You have to build up trust over time. You have to get the channels of communication humming again, and none of this has been done. So yeah, I think there's a lack of experience, and Trump, as I said about him before, it's just that even when his intentions are good, I think he lacks, let's say, the intellectual discipline or to really carry through on a lot of things. That's been my experience. That's what I remember from the first term, and I feel like I'm seeing it. He did surprise me in the first month with a lot of things he did. Hopefully these setbacks will be a learning experience, if at least for his team, and if they really are committed to achieving, better relations with Russia, and they already have, they're better. But if they want to continue down that track and actually negotiate a settlement to the war, which would be difficult in any case, they're going to have to be persistent and patient, and they're going to have to learn a lot. Again, I was just struck by Trump's grasp of the facts is often seems to be haphazard, incomplete. And the same was true of Witkoff. In that interview, that's one thing is said he revealed a striking ignorance about Ukraine. Again, he admitted to some things that that the previous administration would never admit to. He admitted to some truths, but there was also just a lack of knowledge. It was clear there, and that just has to be an impediment to any real successes.
Talking about the interview with Tucker Carlson?
Correct.
So what was some things that he was woefully ignorant of?
Well, he didn't know the name of the oblasts or regions that Russia was laying claim to. I think he managed to remember two of them. He didn't know the recent history of Ukraine. He thought that Ukraine had been cobbled together actually under Khrushchev. And so he confused it with the transfer of Crimea to Ukraine under Khrushchev. But it was actually cobbled together, I believe, under Lenin. It was in the first years of the Soviet Union. So, those are, and there were other things, but that just, you really do need, you can't just have good intentions. You can't just have good negotiating skills. You got to know who you're dealing with. You really need to know, like the Russians and Ukraine inside out. And I just get the sense that, that knowledge, that expertise is not there.
So you don't think that a ceasefire is likely, a negotiated settlement is likely? There was all this talk, and
right. Yeah. Well, I always felt that way, and it just seems increasingly unlikely. And as I think as we stated earlier, probably the greatest impediment is Ukraine itself, and Ukraine is demonstrating that quite clearly right now. There was a ceasefire that was agreed to. Right, over energy infrastructures. And the Russians immediately complied with it. And the Ukrainians just have actually, ever since that ceasefire was declared and agreed to by Zelensky, the Ukrainians have been striking energy facilities, infrastructure within Russia, not... both, let's say, Russian-held territories, in the former East Ukraine, but also within pre-2014 Russia. They've been striking just like every day and multiple times a day. I think like 2 days ago, they struck 5 or 6 times. I think yesterday, or maybe it was today, they struck 2 or 3 times. It's clear that, there's just intentional effort to sabotage the ceasefire agreement. So you see this, this is just a very minor agreement. It's supposed to be a first step, it's kind of a gesture of goodwill. They're basically giving both the Americans and the Russians the finger. And the Russians keep on pointing out, look, they struck so many more facilities today. We do reserve the right to retaliate. They haven't. The The Russians have not retaliated. I think they're just using this, hopefully that they're just using this to demonstrate again, to the Americans, what they're dealing with in Ukraine. I don't think the Russians were really surprised by the Ukrainian behavior, but you hope that I haven't heard anything. That's kind of disturbing. These kind of things have happened in the past. Let's say, for example, the attacks, which continue to this day, the attacks on the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant by Ukraine. It was just like, it was so obvious, these were, highly, clearly reckless and, reckless attacks on a nuclear facility, carried out by the Ukrainians. And it went on for a long time, but you could never get anything even close to a condemnation from the U.S. or even an acknowledgement that it was happening. And it was, kind of hoping that maybe this time around, there'll be a difference. At least we say, okay, the Americans will say, hey, this is outrageous. You got to stop. But we are not hearing anything. So it just makes me wonder, and I'm sure it's making the Russians wondering, making them wonder, whether things have really changed at all.
Why isn't America saying anything? They should be infuriated with Ukraine, right? This is a ceasefire deal that they agreed to. Zelensky said this, and it's in Ukraine's interest. Obviously, if Russia wants to wipe out the rest of Ukraine's energy infrastructure, it has the capability to do so. And it's showing a lot of restraint, but despite it, it seems like the number of attacks on Russian energy infrastructure has increased since the ceasefire. So what's the gain? Do you think that why won't the U.S. speak out against it? In fact, I've been hearing almost the other thing. I was watching BBC last night just for a minute, and it was saying that Trump was angry at Putin for questioning Zelensky's legitimacy. Right. They were saying how angry Trump is, and that this is just an example how Putin was just dragging out the process, no intention to really have a ceasefire. That was the spin that BBC was putting on it. I mean, what's going on? That doesn't make sense.
Well, that's a good question. Well, it's not surprising, of course, the BBC is trying to give it the spin. But it's true. Again, I have heard no statements, no condemnations from the U.S. administration over the repeated attacks on a ceasefire that they, work to achieve. The repeated attacks that are sabotaging the ceasefire. You would think you would get some kind of statement at some point. We haven't had any. And then, as far as Trump's statement on with regard to Putin and the legitimacy of Zelensky, supposedly he's very angry about it. Well, this is the guy who just a few weeks ago called Zelensky a dictator, right? So I don't know. It just does not seem like he's really in a position to be very angry. And it's not like Putin is bringing it, has come up with this for the first time. This has been his consistent position. Putin, if nothing else, is very consistent. He where he stands. He's not like Trump, who says one thing one day and then something else the next. He says the same thing. Like when he adopts a position, he maintains it. He set the terms again for a settlement. He set them out back in June of last year, and he and his entire, administration have been very, very consistent about that ever since. And then it's for the last several months, he's been making this argument about Zelensky's legitimacy. And so it's nothing new. I don't know why Trump would be angry. If he said, okay, I'm going to drop that, I'm not going to question its legitimacy. And then he went back on it. Then, Trump would have a point, but he's not making that argument. Yeah, so I don't know. I don't know what's going on.
Yeah, you're saying, that it takes a long time to build trust, especially after 3 years of no communication and this aggression towards Russia from the United States for so long. And I agree, this trust is the main thing that America needs to work on if we're going to move forward in the world and be a cooperative international player. In a multipolar world, you have to have that. It's not the unipolar moment. We could impose, we could lie, we could just do whatever we want. But if there was this recognition that you're in a multipolar world, you understand you have to engage in diplomacy and forge this trust. But and I thought that was the path we were potentially going on when I heard Marco Rubio make that statement. Then we had the ceasefire agreement in Gaza. But since then, it seems like the ceasefire agreement with Gaza, it was almost a ruse itself. It was torn up. There was no real, seems like a real idea to move to phase two. And then we see these negotiations happening in Russia right now, where we push forward the ceasefire agreement to stop attacks on energy infrastructure. And it seems like we're doing nothing to back it up. With the JCPOA, with Iran, it was the same thing. We had this agreement. Then we didn't fulfill our side of the bargain. And then we ripped it up under Trump, and now we're demanding that Iran sign a new deal with them when they obviously is like, we can't trust you. You didn't honor the first one. We see what's happening in Gaza. We see what's happening in Russia. We see the ceasefire agreement in Lebanon. We can look at Minsk 1, Minsk 2, Istanbul. It's like the whole record of our ability to create trust. If you just look at it, our trust level is almost at zero. And instead of trying to turn that around and boost our trust score up, we're continuing the same thing. It's insane. Why? Surely is there just not a recognition? Do you think it's just hubris or is it just stupidity, or is there just too many people with different interests moving different things? So just things are just in flux constantly. Why can't we have any honor, integrity?
Yeah, I think it's all of those things. I mean, hubris is certainly a part of it. And, that's one thing, again, is that Trump, he's not a globalist. He's not a neocon. I think that's clear. He doesn't share their ideology. And that in itself is good. But like I said before, he's still he's openly an America firster. And I think he's unwilling to abandon American exceptionalism, and say, he's not interested in the neocons' vision of a unified world, led by the U.S. and the West. But he insists on being top dog and being able to wield the stick, and he did it again, because I think in discussing Putin and the Russians, he said that, if they don't come to the table, or if they fail to carry through in a way that Trump is expecting, then he'll have to apply more sanctions, or we may have to apply more sanctions. It's the same old thing. And I'm sure that the Russians hear that and say, okay, we're back to Biden, if that's really the path you're going to go down. You need to build up trust. You have to establish credibility, and that's hard to do. It can be done, but it takes time, and it's in an incremental process. If you lost trust, you can't demand the other side, okay, now you must trust me in this vast overarching agreement that I'm presenting to you. So no way are we going to trust you. Why should we? We're not. But if you can build up trust over time, with smaller things, the other side is willing to take risks, whether it's Iran or Russia, if it's a very small issue. And one example was this energy infrastructure ceasefire. It was a very small step, and people kind of ridiculed it. But you do have to start with small things like that. But even there, we're failing. It's, the Ukrainians are sabotaging it, and it looks like the Americans aren't doing anything about it. They're not doing anything to rein in, their rabid dog in Ukraine. We're not going to get anywhere if we don't have trust.
Do you think Russia is just waiting for the U.S. to do something about Ukraine? It's like, this is your proxy, Ukraine. You agree to it. Are you able to enforce it? Will they give them a certain amount of time? And then Russia's like, okay, we're going to retaliate now. We're going to wipe out some more of their energy infrastructure, and then they might start doing a faster advance and move on to Odessa, Kharkov.
Right. Well, I think they're probably, they've stuck with the ceasefire so far, in spite of the repeated, the great number of violations by the Ukrainian side. And they probably will stick with it all the way through to the end for all 30 days. I'm just guessing, to make a point. Say, look, we abided by it. The Ukrainians didn't. Now, you cannot blame us. We're pulling out of it. They can do it because they're not really sacrificing very much or very little. First of all, the Ukrainians, Yeah, they are striking, let's say depots and pumping stations or just hitting electrical high tension power lines, that kind of thing, and causing power outages. But there are small outages. The damage is repaired rather quickly. Maybe the people in let's say part of Bryansk or whatever, they lose power for a few hours or half a day, and then it comes back on. Okay, it's an inconvenience, but there is not anything close to being, presenting a strategic threat to the U.S. Not even close, rather to Russia, I should say. So yeah, they can sacrifice it, I think, just in order to make this point without really conceding anything substantive. And then again, they probably have had some strikes planned for these 30 days, but typically the really big strikes come in like once a month. So they may have been planning the next one 30 days from the start of this agreement anyway. And so they really gave very little up on their side. So they can do it. I think that's what I think they will go through to the end. They'll complete the 30 days and then say, okay, we've made our point, and
right.
If we're not going to do anything about it, I don't know what we're going to do now.
Right. So when's the end of this 30-day ceasefire? Do we know the exact date?
Yeah, it started officially on March 18th, or I think that's when Zelensky agreed to it. So we would say April 18th or April 16th, I guess it would be.
Okay.
Yeah, something like that.
Okay. Yeah, I'm wondering if they will. I wouldn't be surprised if Russia comes out pretty strong after this. Maybe a little bit of pent up energy and rage, like, hey, we abided by this for a while. We held back. We didn't violate the ceasefire. Now it's over. Okay, now we can take the glove off and hit back.
Yeah,
I wouldn't be surprised. And it also lines up pretty well with beginning. I mean, we're at the end of Are we in the mud season? When does that mud season end?
Yeah, I think approximately a month from now. There is a lot of talk, just setting aside this energy infrastructure ceasefire for the moment. There has been a lot of talk about imminent offensives by the Russians, large offensives, and I've heard that talk before. I've heard it many times, and so I take it with a pinch of salt. But it seems like this time the chatter, let's say, is even louder. That there are a lot of people who are generally kind of cautious about these things, are just certain, there is going to be one. So we may, and Putin himself made some comment that, we're going to finish them off. And that doesn't quite mean, he didn't specifically say that he was going to launch an offensive, but a lot of people took it that way. I think that maybe that's what we're going to see. I would say there's a better chance this time than I think there ever has been in the past that we will see that offensive. Clearly they have the reserves to do it. They have hundreds of thousands of reserves positioned both in the north and in the south. They could launch these major offensives. And so we may very well see them in about a month. And then, of course, maybe even more importantly, Putin recently said that, okay, we have been saying that these 4 oblasts are Russian, and that's not going to change. And we're also demanding that they be recognized as such by Ukraine and by the U.S. And then if this doesn't happen, we're moving on. This was always implied, but I think it was recently that he made that statement. I think when Putin is very, very careful with his words, he sticks to a position. He doesn't budge from it. But then when you see something like in this case, as sort of he clearly has expanded the terms. He hasn't laid it out exactly like what territories may say, but we're moving beyond if these territories are not recognized soon by the other side. That's very meaningful. And again, it does suggest that there's, it doesn't prove, but it does suggest that there is a major offensive or offensives, in the wings.